Welcome to NASDAQ Trade Talks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at NASDAQ. Joining me at the market site in Times Square, we have Pierre Debbas. He is with Romer Debbas, LLP, and we are going to take a look at multiple scenarios if a Republican, Democrat, or socialist gets into office. What does that do to the real estate markets? What does it do to the banking and rates markets? Certainly a hot topic of conversation. I'm sure we will have more of this over the next year, but, regardless of who gets into office, how is the real estate market susceptible to it?
It's a great question. Every election year, the real estate market always has a halt in activity in the number of months leading up to election. Mainly, it's a psychological aspect of investing in an illiquid asset without knowing what the policies of the White House are going to be moving forward. And it may sound like a broad general statement I just made, but when you take the policies of each president, they can directly impact the health of the real estate market, meaning in terms of regulations on banks, the economy in general, and investment, development, and so on and so forth. So it's a really important topic to pay attention to in going into election in terms of predicting exactly how you feel that what potential administration is going to come into the White House and what policies they'll enact in basically impacting the value of your asset.
Right. All right. Let's run through all the scenarios here. We'll start with the Republicans. This is with the assumption that Trump remains in office. Clearly, he has an inclination to keep rates low. That's one of the things. What are some other scenarios?
Well, it's funny. When you go back to the 2016 election, if you take a market like New York City or the New York market in general, it was probably a fair statement to say that it was an unpopular outcome. And we had here basically a halt in activity like I was describing. But if you look at the SALT states were severely impacted by tax reform and Trump's policies. But on the flip side, you have a lot of positive factors that took place, such as interest rates being now at a 3-year low. Just yesterday, the Fed decided to reduce rates to 1.5 to 1.75 yet again. And you have unemployment. Today's stats came out at 3.6%, which is maintaining a 50-year low. And the S&P broke a record this week in terms of its all-time high. These are all fundamental factors which are very positive for the real estate market in general. So when you look at, a president's impact on the market, here we just described, one extreme negative with respect to the tax reform and the SALT states, and fundamental factors which are direct correlation to, the current policy of the White House.
Yeah, but that's also why you're seeing an exodus of people leaving SALT states like California, like New York, and going to areas that are more attractive, such as a Florida or a Texas. And I believe Trump put something out today that he's now calling Florida his home state for that reason.
Yes, that's in fact true, which is interesting to say the least.
That impacts, it trickles down to the state and local economy at some point.
Absolutely it does. Here you have the president that's claiming Florida residency, probably primarily to save on state and city income taxes. And you may, could that have a ripple effect on the rest of New York City and what local residents are going to do? That's another thing to take in consideration is that, right now in the high tax states, if taxes were to increase on a federal level or certain policies of, Democrats or socialists are to be passed, are you going to see an exodus of people from the SALT states going to places like Nashville, Florida, Texas? That's a huge risk that could potentially take place.
All right, let's take a look at the Democratic scenario here. Let's say Elizabeth Warren, for example, gets into office. I imagine she's going to put some regulations around the banks.
Yeah, she's been very, very vocal about that. She's bringing up the Glass-Steagall Act, where you're separating, basically investment banks from retail banks in a sense. And what happens is that if they're going to start over-regulating the banks won't lend to real estate. Home ownership will decline as a result. And we saw this when the Dodd-Frank Act was passed. So after the financial crisis, I think it's easy to say that the banks needed to have more regulations on them after what we saw with subprime lending, so on and so forth. But now we're finally in the real estate market at a place where lending is at a healthy pace. As a real estate lawyer, we're closing hundreds of commercial residential transactions on an annual basis. And I can see a distinct difference between banks' lending requirements and regulations today versus pre-recession. And we're at a healthy stage today. And if you have a Democrat such as Elizabeth Warren come in and start over-regulating the banks, that's definitely going to lead to a lack of credit in the real estate market.
All right. On the flip side, however, they might undo some aspects of tax reform and keep SALT at bay a bit.
Which would be great for New York and California in particular. The markets here still have not adjusted to SALT tax reform, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
Especially in the suburbs and outside of New York City. They're still grappling in terms of where the pricing is going to end up being, and that's going to take probably a couple more years to iron out.
Yeah. All right. Now, our last scenario here is socialist. This is with the assumption that Bernie Sanders, for example, was to get in. You think that the economy and the housing market could come to a halt if they were to adopt some of his policies?
Absolutely, because if you look at it now, right, whenever we have any adverse information in the news, right now we've never had such dramatic headlines in U.S. history, I feel like. And if you're going to have somebody come in the White House of a socialist party, we've never had a socialist in the White House.
So we just have to adapt to a whole new philosophy.
Absolutely, and how's the economy going to adjust to it? How's the economy going to adjust to that? How's the stock market going to adjust to it? There's so many variables that it would heighten the trepidation to enter into the real estate market more than we already have at the moment. And then also too, with Bernie Sanders, they're discussing creating national rent regulation. If you have national rent regulation, it's going to suppress rents, which may make renting more appealing than buying. And you already have a situation where millennials are gravitating towards being renters forever as opposed to saving money and buying in real estate. So that actually can increase that sentiment more moving forward.
I also think that's kind of more of a cultural and generational shift as well, where people want to rent, they want to be in the city where they work, they're not spending their time commuting. And in the apartment buildings, even in New York, Jersey City, Hoboken, Brooklyn, the local areas, they're massive high-rises. They have their gym, their shopping, their daycare, their communities are all within one spot.
Right.
I have a feeling that's something that will continue to grow with this generation at least.
Yeah, no, that's fair to say. I mean, this generation, people want things immediately at their doorstep, and people want things, we've grown accustomed to everything being delivered to you within seconds.
Yeah.
And people want everything, every aspect of their life to fall in that category.
All right, well, this will certainly be interesting to see how things play out. I have a feeling we'll be having you back. Thank you so much for joining us at
Thanks for having me
MarketSite.
today.
And thank you for joining me on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Market